So our theme is intergenerational dialogue, and we're going to talk about deep impact topics, like, thank you for keying that up, consciousness and awareness, like the impact of our lives and our activities, and how we can actually contribute to collaboration amongst generations as opposed to making it more divisive. We'll introduce ourselves briefly, including myself, so I play a dual role. I will participate not just as a facilitator, but also sharing my thoughts, and then I'm going to facilitate and we'll have a dialogue. We'll keep it fairly short. Many of you know a little bit what we're doing, but we want to encourage ourselves to tell you why we do what we do, and not just the so-called facts. So I would like to reflect briefly about the last 20 years of impact investing and why I landed on the deep impact side with you. So my wife Lisa and I, we started our impact investing journey now over 20 years ago. Now, it makes me feel old a little bit, and maybe I am old, getting old, but that's the whole point, right, of this discussion. And and we started out supporting social entrepreneurs, and then we figured, so many social entrepreneurs do great works, but they have nothing to do with system change. And we figured out that the systems are really not working for us, especially the financial system and the economic system, because they're designed wrongly. The design flaws of these systems actually contribute to being on a collision course and a course of collapse for society and for ecology. Now, when you look at the systems, we actually know what to do. We know how to design them differently. We know the principles that we would have to deploy in order to make this a super thriving world for all sentient beings. We know about circularity, we know about resiliency, we know about regeneration, we know about regionality, and we decide for whatever reason that we are not demanding and changing the systems to serve us as opposed to only the rich and themselves. Why is that? Because intellectually we know what to do. From the heart we feel what to do. It's because our collective consciousness and awareness is not there. Partially because our brains are very powerful instruments that pretend, that make us think that we are somehow special, that we are outside of the evolutionary constraints, that we're not part of the universe. And that's an illusion, right? Even intellectually, you know that that's not the case. But it does give you the permission to actually dominate other tribes, nature, and everything else, right? And so we need to wake up collectively in order to change the systems that we know how to change to. And that's where we ended up. So we went from social entrepreneurs to system change, and then saying, why can't we change these systems, to now I work on the intersection of, I'm a technologist too. I love the discussion about iOS. I actually architected System 10 with Steve Jobs in the 90s and was the responsible engineering manager to do that, not imagining what would happen later, right? And I was in AI before, not imagining that we're subject to a business model that monetizes our behavior without really asking us and just going in the wrong direction. So the last discussion was perfect, right? Because we need to change that, and the way to change it is by changing ourselves in order to change the collective consciousness and awareness of humanity. Oh, it was not me, good. So, one more thought, and then I hand it over, because I want to make it flow, these thoughts, into our conversation a little bit. So we are in turbulent times, and we just are experiencing two major disruptions, a war and a pandemic, and we're not treating the root causes of either one. We're just treating the symptoms, right? And if you look, what it took to elevate the awareness and consciousness of us a little bit, it took a major disruption with millions of people almost like dying, not millions, but tens of thousands, and all of that. So does that mean that we need these disruptions in order to elevate our consciousness? Does it need a bigger disruption in order to really elevate our consciousness to the level where we actually do it, what we need to do courageously? Maybe, maybe not, right? When I thought about this and I just wrote about this, I got a little depressed. And then I got out of my funk because of the people here, of you, and that I see the bottom-up development of consciousness actually happening now. Despite what's going on top-down, despite of whom we have elected, I see that as the hope that I have actually for a step function that could happen faster than we think, that needs to happen faster than we think, in order to then change the systems. So that will be a little bit the discussion, that we have. And I'm going to ask Julia first to introduce a little bit yourself and why you do that. A little bit sort of what I try to do, why I'm doing things, not just what I do, right? And then we go over to Jonas. Yeah? Julia,
amazing. Please. Thank you so much, Charly, for having me here and for everyone. It's my first time at Catapult, and I'm having a wonderful experience already. So as Charly said, I'm the co-founder of Tidal Impact, which is an impact management and investment company catalyzing companies with a purpose to change the world in a better way. I'll walk you a bit through the journey of how I actually got started, because it was quite serendipitous, I would say, and actually a lot of it was touching on what Charly just said about elevating consciousness. So a couple of years ago, I was leading a global entrepreneurship community called, back then it was called Kairos Society, now it's called Sigma Squared Society. And our mission was and is to unite the most ambitious founders from all around the world to create impactful businesses to solve big problems. And we're in over 25 countries all around the world. And that was really my touch point with a lot of amazing young entrepreneurs who really had an intention to develop technologies and innovations to change something, to tackle climate change, to improve the education system, to tackle the failing healthcare system and a lot of things. And Kairos back then had a fund in New York which invested in some of those companies. And one of the first LPs, who is Mohanad, him and I met, and we instantly had a connection, and we kind of talked about what's wrong in the world. We talked about the venture capital system, especially in the Valley, and how it is not designed really to help impact-driven entrepreneurs, and how we must change the way we finance companies, right? And that it's not just about pouring more and more capital into the world of impact, but it's also about innovating and even revolutionizing the financial system. And at the same time, we talked a lot about our own beliefs and our perceptions of the world. And I had a bit of a wake-up call journey myself, him as well, and we just reflected on the role of awareness and consciousness in anything that we build. And I know we're going to talk about that a little bit down the road, but that was really what connected us, and we were like, it was a no-brainer, we need to build this to innovate in the world of impact investing, but also we need to build a company together with people who share that sense of awareness and consciousness and want to contribute to, in a way, elevating the energy in the world and contributing that as well. And so that really was the start of that journey. And my kind of entry into the world of impact investing, because beforehand I was on the other side, I was a founder, I'd built a lot of communities and ecosystems, and so that's a little bit about myself, I'd say.
How inspiring. Thank you for sharing that a little bit, and we'll key off some of the comments that you made in a minute. Jonas, share a little bit what you're up to and why.
Thank you for your word. I'm taking a bit different approach, maybe. After graduating high school, I received a scholarship from China. So I studied Chinese in Shanghai, and that's where I started to embody what a climate crisis may look like. I experienced extreme levels of pollution. I saw fields destroyed and also met people living in not knowing what's going on. And that really sparked something in me. And I said, this cannot be true. Things cannot be that bad. So I started to really look into the science. And it seemed to be even worse than what I thought. And that's when I started to be engaged. I took my bachelor's, led the Students' Initiative in Foreign Affairs. That didn't do the trick, so I also became a Nordic youth representative to the climate COPs and the biodiversity COPs. So I'm sitting around the negotiation tables. But we're so far off, I can tell. I'm talking with top leaders in IPCC and IPBES, and I'm in the negotiations. But it's absolutely terrifying to see how far away we are. And that really led me to, okay, we really need bottom-up pressure as well. We really need activism. And that's why I went into Extinction Rebellion, which is nonviolent civil disobedience. And I really felt the need in Norway for having youth disrupting these destructive practices and building a movement. So yeah, I started XR Youth Norway, and we have had a lot of actions just this week, but also the last year, which has been really prominent. Yeah, which we will talk more about. But yeah, looking forward to everything.
What great leaders here amongst ourselves, so really inspiring to listen to why you do things and what you do. I think if I were young, I would probably do even that as well, right? Maybe I should do it now when I'm old. Let's talk about the consciousness and awareness piece. And I want to share a little bit of personal story that has been impacting me in the last 3 years very deeply. And that's, I almost died 3 years ago of a very, very difficult type of cancer. And so I had to really prepare for death, which really sharpens your senses on many different levels and creates some confusion initially, at least for me, because I was confused about if I'd only live for another 6 months, what should I work on, right? And to have a bucket list, it turns out I didn't have a bucket list. And it turns out that I did all the things that I wanted to do anyway, and they would go on without me or with me. So I got to peace with that. But it helped me really go deeper in my own exploration of the meaning of my life and how I need to be present in order to serve the communities and the planet. And I'm grateful, right, that I came out of it. As a matter of fact, just last month I got the Clean Bill of Health, 3 years clean, and so I'm healthy again. And so that means to me that there's a reason for that, and the reason is actually that I have work to do, right? And I feel the urgency. I feel personally, that every day my impermanence, and I'm thankful for that on one level. Even so it's a little distracting, but you learn how to live with that. And so without, the inner work that I have to do in order to be present, in order to do what I need to do, the mindfulness practice is essential. And mindfulness practices can happen whatever works for you, right? Mine is a combination of yoga and meditation and reflection and all of this. And I think that is a commonality, that mindfulness and awareness in humanity right now, independent of tribes, independent of gender, independent of age groups. And I just wanted to really have a conversation with you about how you feel about that, how that plays a role in your lives or not, and what centers you, what you both do really hard work, right? And I know that needs presence, right? And not just intellect, not just feeling. So maybe, do you want to share a little bit how you think about that? And both, if you so choose, on a personal level, as well as maybe on a different level.
Very happy to. And Charly, I have to say, I know we talked about it before, but your story really resonated with me at a deep level, because my, I'd say, transformation journey started about 5 years ago when I also was facing quite a few health issues. And that was really my wake-up call to it was like, I have to do something differently. Like, if I don't do something differently, I don't want to live like this for the rest of my life. And one of the things that it taught me was that change really happens within myself first. There's the saying that you can't change anybody else. The only person or the only thing that you can change is yourself. And I think that is something that I really noticed.
You know, Julia, we decided that we can have a conversation, so I'm not
Of
rudely
course.
interrupting. I wish I knew that at her age. I had to first go through a career and then, and then go get sick before I understood that. So congratulations.
In hindsight, I'm happy that I got sick 5 years ago, even though it was terrible. But I'm like, wow, it really prompted that whole journey.
Yeah.
And I also learned that the world outside of me is just a reflection of the world inside of me. So if I want to see any sort of change on the outside, the first thing, like you said yourself, is I have to change myself no matter what I want to do. And especially when it comes to the kind of energy that I emit into the world. So before, I'd say I didn't really think much about that, but now I think the most important thing for me is to approach everything I do with kindness, with a loving energy, and with optimism, whether that's in my work or on a personal level. And I mean, during that time, I also learned about the practices that worked for me. I tried out yoga, I tried out different types of meditations, and that really helped to center myself. And I think that's a way of living and being that transcended into everything that I do. Like I described, the company that I'm now building, my two co-founders are really on that same level as well. And we're like, we only want to work with people that are exhibiting or emitting that kind of energy as well. And another thing is also learning to listen to my intuition. There's my favorite book from Michael Singer, which is called The Surrender Experiment, and he talks a lot about the power of intuition, and that ultimately we have to learn to listen to our intuition, to work with the right people, to work on the right things, and then I believe change will happen. And the things that I will end with is I really believe in the potential of technology and AI, machine learning, blockchain, all of these things, but I still think they're a means to an end, because we can see that they can be used for good purposes and for bad purposes, like the previous panel was kind of alluding to. And I think that it starts with our intention, to have the right intention, to have the right degree of awareness, to then work on these things and leverage all of those technologies to tackle the problems that we are facing right now, because I don't think we lack any brain cells or skills or technologies to do that, to be honest.
Wow. All right. Thank you for sharing that. Jonas, you're working with a lot of people who are angry, who are not at peace inside, right? How do you deal with that, both in yourself and how you approach, adversarial actions that you do, from a centeredness standpoint, or from just give us a little bit of sense how that works for you.
Yeah, as an activist, raising consciousness and awareness is crucial, but it's a very complex, and for me, that starts with a relationship, with some type of dialogue, by meeting other people. And I will give you an example. For example, at COP26 at Glasgow, I was the last day, we had all the different constituencies holding their speeches. And I was talking to farmers, for example, from Africa, and they said, this pact, what they have agreed upon, is a death sentence to me. And I had to stand there as a Norwegian, and we are total hypocrisy in our oil adventures. And I had to say, yes, I know. And it's absolutely heartbreaking to know the type of violence that we are putting towards these people. And that contact for me, having that, being in touch with that violence and actually meeting those people, that's what brings the awareness and brings the spark. That gives me the energy to fight and also to try to raise awareness here. And I think in XR Youth and XR, we are angry, yes, but we're not disrupting things because we have a need to do something wrong. It is out of love for what we have. and we really want to protect that.
Out of love of what we have and protect it.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
and for example, how do you raise awareness? That's a huge question, right? And I use civil disobedience. For example, last year, I gathered XR Youth, I gathered 25 youth activists, and we went peacefully into the oil and energy department and sat down. If we have been outside with our posters, no one would have cared. We would have been completely ignored. I can promise you, because I've done that tons of time. But the moment we went in, the whole media came, Reuters came, international media, there were pictures in CNN, like, and you could see youth climate activists storming the oil and energy department for all live, you know. So that's using that civil disobedience as a you're creating lose-lose situations for those having disruptive practices and just starting new conversations, which is important, I think.
I think the most important thing that you shared from my perspective is that you do it out of love for humanity and yourself, and not out of hate or out of a negative energy.
And especially for the marginalized people.
And positive energy, you know, creates positive energy, and negative attracts negative energy. That's how the universe works, right? And so I applaud you for approaching these difficult things from that perspective, because it's the only way that works, right?
I'm curious, may I ask a question?
Yeah.
What, in your opinion, has been the moment where you said, wow, like, that's a moment where I've raised so much awareness, or the biggest change I've created thus far as an activist?
That's a huge one. I think for me, it's, for example, XR Youth. I started it, and it's just people know its presence. They know that there are youth out there putting their bodies, and really, they're just aware. It's like been within newsletters. There's like in the last election, because we went into the oil and energy department. That was 1 month before the election, and that was like referenced to all the time. Now even youth are disrupting things. So it's been a part of our common language. That youth are kind of opposing this, but we're still only 20 people. But that's like a general notion that youth are actually against this, and I think just creating that type of language and awareness is a huge thing. But also, like last month, we chained ourselves to a Russian oil tanker, 250 meters long, and blocked it, and it was the first oil tanker that actually returned back to Russia with like stuff worth over 1 billion Norwegian kroners. And that reached like CNN, Washington Post, New York Times, Risk. So that's also probably the biggest like impact for media. Yeah.
So how are we doing on time? Okay. We could go on for a long time, you know, different topics. We'll probably do one more topic and then open it up so people have a chance to ask some questions. Let's talk about the impact, you know, of our work, right? The impact of, and I think, Julia, you phrased it almost like I phrase it, that the impact of my life is what I would say is a direct expression of who I am internally, and that's why it's so important to actually work on your inner self, as you articulated quite well, right? And yet there's also lots of tools, right, out there, and things that we need to use that are not holistic. They're actually reductionist in thinking, right? And we need to do both, the holistic exploration of our impact and then using some quantification as well. You know, yesterday we launched here in typical Catapult way, you know, a new effort to include systemic investments, impact investments into methodologies, right? So that's started at Catapult, and we'll have a life moving forward. And, you know, at Tonic, which I co-founded 11 years ago, we're doing deep impact circles, archetypal types of organizations in circles, where we explore the difficult questions of that we are participating in the system and benefiting from the system, even as impact investors, right? Because you can't decouple yourself totally from that. And yet we need to acknowledge that. And that's not a discussion that impact investors necessarily like to have, but we have to have that, in my opinion, if we're serious about system change, right? And so how do you think about either your own life or the tools that you use or top down, bottom up. How do you spend your time even to maximize the impact that you want to have in your lives, right? It's a constant struggle for me, but I just go with my guts. I don't plan that much anymore, and wonderful things happen that I didn't even plan, right? Which is kind of still miraculous to me. But how do you think about that? Yeah, the impact.
Yeah.
And then we'll close it for an opening up for questions. Yeah, so we have some time. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think there's impact on the personal level. There's also impact on a professional level. And I was thinking about it the other day, and I would say I'm a big geek when it comes to measuring anything about my life. So I measure the amount of sleep I get. I measure my health, my wellness. I have different variables. I have a whole spreadsheet how I quantify my life. Yeah. And it's not like that I don't go with my intuition, but I also believe that data is really important in life, right? And you have to be able to measure in order to improve anything. And it actually gives me more awareness about myself if I know, okay, like I got, 7 hours of sleep.
Feedback loops, right?
Feedback loops, exactly. And I worked 12 hours today, and then I can have all these different correlations. When I started measuring my sleep, I knew I didn't sleep well after chemo anymore, and I threw away my Oura ring because because I didn't want to see that anymore. I knew that I didn't sleep well, right? Right. Well, maybe now you can reintroduce it in your life. But that actually is very linked to even what we do at Tidal Impact, because we're like, well, we as an impact investor want to be very intentional about the impact we create, and in order to demonstrate that impact investment opportunities can be just as interesting as regular type of investments and can have a really healthy financial return, especially in the long term, we need to be able to gather the right data and need to be able to measure what that impact means, not only today but in the future, and that creates a movement that will be able to accelerate this whole direction of capital into impact opportunities, I would say.
You're going to use AI on your own data set soon, I can tell.
Yeah, for sure.
Jonas, how about you?
Yeah, I probably should do something with that as well. I want to start out by saying that you have to understand the nature of the ecological crisis when tackling this problem, because it's so complex and the transformation in it is so huge that there is no either or. Like, there is no, okay, let's do bottom up and then that will solve it. And there is no, let's go to the cops and things will be solved. We really need to work at all layers within the complex system. And then you have to ask yourself, what is my part of that? Where is my expertise? Where do I want to use my time? And I started with top down, but I understood that that's not doing the trick. So now I'm focusing more on bottom up. But what is it in the bottom up that I find interesting? Well, and where is the hope I have for my future? Because I don't look forward to my future. I'm terrified, and for good reason. But where I find hope is when it comes to tipping points. Because we're close to planetary tipping points, but there are also economic, financial, and social tipping points. And my activism is like non-linear. It's not linear. I'm not looking, okay, let's do A and then we'll get B. This X money and this much reduction. I'm trying to, I'm seeding seeds all across the board to try to make initiative grow and create social tipping points that have exponential growth that actually can get us somewhere close to where we need to be. And that's where I'm trying to get those social tipping points. For you investors, that can go to the financial or economic, trying to find those tipping points. But it's not going to do the trick by just say, okay, I'm going to use 20% of my investments will be sustainable. You really have to embed it in social justice, in regenerative practices, understand the nature crisis, and really not have a profit-based motive, but see, okay, where are the tipping points? Where is it that I can make a seed? And I'm not sure if I will gain anything from it, but the potential of the investment is so much more that, like, really important. And that's where your task is to, because I don't know that, you're much better at that than me. So I want you to analyze, by your expertise, where are those tipping points? How can you make that difference? And that's the only thing that gives me hope. That's the only way you can give me hope if you take on that path.
Since we are about intergenerational, the last question that I have before we open it up is intergenerational dialogue a tipping point?
What's your answer first?
It is, absolutely, I think. It is time to do that. It's time to give particularly the young generation not just a voice, but a seat at the table, and you're excluded from many tables. And so I'm not surprised that you search for other alternatives in order to be heard, right? And we're at the first generation of climate change activists. And in order to be heard in the first generation of a new movement, you gotta do things that make you heard, like feminists, 50 years had to do, right? And I really look forward to the second generation of climate activists, where I hope that even maybe in some countries, like New Zealand or Scotland, or countries that are led by women, coincidentally, right? That we would have coalitions of climate change activists that are not just that need to do things in order to be heard, but actually, work in collaboration, not only intergenerational, but also with all the actors of the system to move the system forward. And I am dedicating a lot of my energy to just bust through the toxic echo chambers of blaming each other generationally or not.
I really love that answer, and I'll give an example. So in the Sigma Squared Society, we actually talk about a concept called reverse mentoring.
Yeah.
So all of our founders around the world are pretty much in their early, mid, or late 20s, and we want to purposefully involve senior executives and leaders from around the world, because if you think about it, like 40, 50 years ago, it was your parents and the grandparents that had authority and that would teach you things. But nowadays, it's coming from the younger generation as well. So like our kids, for example, would be teaching us how to use certain computer programs or how to use our devices. And I think that's the dynamic that's shifting, which is why it's important to have that conversation and to involve young people. I'd even say the generation of my young brother, I'm really proud of him, because when he was 15 years old, he started a climate think tank. And he started being an activist and fighting against climate change at 15 years old. I'm like, I didn't think about that when I was 15 years old. And so that really gives me hope. And he knows much more about me than much more than me about anything related to climate policy and politics and any of that. So you need to include people like him at the table and get them to exchange thoughts, similar to how our founders are doing that as well.
Reverse mentoring, what a beautiful concept, right? Would you be my mentor?
I'd be glad to,
Wonderful.
to do that.
Jonas?
Yeah, just quickly, is intergenerational dialogue a tipping point? Yes, but why stop there? I mean, why just age? How I envision the future is a much more intersectional climate movement, where you connect the anti-racist, anti-fascist, feminism, all these different social struggles together. Including age and all different layers of discrimination. That's what I'm hoping for.
All right, let's have some questions. And if you direct it to somebody directly or to me, and then we will explore it, just state that.
Thank you very much. That was a great conversation. Okay, this is going to sound very confrontational. I don't mean it that way. But in my mind, as much as I agree with the cause area, the issue of Extinction Rebellion, civil disobedience is ademocratic or undemocratic, just fundamentally. Do you imagine there's some objective and generalizable criteria we can use to decide when it's okay and when it's not? You can imagine civil disobedience in support of religious fundamentalist ideas, for example. Is that okay? They're acting from love and trying to make them. I think they're on the wrong side of history. They don't.
Do you want to take it? Yeah.
Well, civil disobedience is definitely not undemocratic. It's a pillar of democracy. Democracy is about accepting dissidents. And what's been driving democracy and human rights, for example, feminism, the Martin Luther King movement, Gandhi, all these things are civil disobedience. Our rights have been fought forward by civil disobedience. That's a huge part of why we are so privileged that we are today. And, you know, I'm a political scientist. I'm talking with political scientists and professors, and when we have our discussions about civil disobedience, no one are talking about this being undemocratic. That's what I feel is mostly politicians from politicians that really don't understand the different. Yeah.
So this is a deep topic, right? And we will not be able to do it justice. And I encourage you to have conversations afterwards about this very important topic, right? And when I'm asked about, I live in the US, I'm dual citizen, and when I'm asked about taxation of the rich, for instance, you know, I mentioned to my European friends that in the last administration, I would not want to pay taxes to the orange guy who was, you know, in the White House for a few years, because I pretty much disagree with most of what he uses my taxes for. Now that's civil disobedience, that I reserve the right to do that, you know, as long as I don't have to go to jail, for instance, right? And so it's not simple, these questions, right? If you, in any case, do you have a comment before we move on to the next question? Okay.
I'm fine.
I've got a question.
And then we have a question here, I think, afterwards. Yeah.
Thank you for this session. I totally agree on what you said about from which motivation you're doing things. I wanted to link what Jonas said to what the two of you said about, like, with whom do we work? So in terms of tactics, Charly, you mentioned it's so difficult to change the consciousness of people. And in the light of the challenges and the problems that we're facing, is it enough to work with people that have the same spirit, or do we have to really intentionally work with people and use mechanisms that you think are not the best mechanisms, that are not mechanisms that we would motivates us in terms of greed, in terms of do we have to use these mechanisms in order to change the world faster than changing the consciousness of the people?
In order to have a meaningful conversation with somebody else about something that requires more awareness and consciousness, if they don't have that, it's not their fault that you don't have a meaningful conversation. So you have to actually throttle up and down the depth. I throttled it up a little bit, if you wish, today because of the audience, and you're mostly with us talking about these topics. But if I were to talk, which I do, to hedge fund managers, usually men, I talk about hedging first and not consciousness. If I talk to an active general of war, I don't talk with him, also mostly men, about deep peace, because they are not equipped, and I'm not judgmental, right? I just say they are not equipped right now in their lives to have the conversation on that level. If you cannot have that, there's nothing you can do until the people wake up to have that conversation. We can inspire them to wake up, but we can't tell them to wake up. It doesn't work that way.
There's this nice saying, you can only lead a horse to water, right? But you can't force it to drink the water, which I think is something that describes that scenario.
And if you tune in, you will see where the energy level is, right? And you can practice that and learn it over time.
Yeah. Can you hear? Yeah. Thank you, Julie, for saying that everything has to be done with kindness and presence, something like that. When it comes to civil disobedience, I don't think we can brush it aside as easily, although I also sympathize with the cause and the overall mission. But there are many things I disagree with. For instance, they didn't allow Dalai Lama to go into the parliament in the main entrance, and many other things. But imagine if everybody who disagrees with something would go to the parliament and glue themselves there, or be civil disobedient, then it would just become a complete chaos. I think in Norway we have multiple political parties that are fighting for the environmental cause, and it's freedom of speech. you cannot really compare that with Dalai Lama or Gandhi or whatever. They were simply stating what they believed was right, not stopping democratic processes. So I know this sounds terribly old-fashioned, but I think it is important, because if we somehow start accepting those type of practices, then where do we put the limit? What about people that believe that Europe is becoming too Muslimized, so we have to go around and shoot people? Is that okay? It's not.
Do you want to respond to this, or not? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, it's fair that it's fair criticism. So we had an action on Wednesday where we glued ourselves to the parliament, and the idea in the spørretimen, which is they're discussing things, and the part of the reason was to criticize that present interests are so consistently prioritized over all those who doesn't have a vote. So we want to go inside 1 hour to hold a speech, replicating the science for bringing that up. And we can talk more about that in detail.
So thank you for this question as well. And I think societies will have to wrestle with this. It will get worse before it gets better, because the problems are actually going to increase and not decrease. And so I see actually an opportunity to have the dialogue and to start the dialogue and to respectfully disagree if you disagree. Nothing wrong with that. But without dialogue, I think we will end up in violence. I don't want to end on that one, actually. Let me put it back and say the opposite is actually much more compelling. And I think with dialogue that we can avoid, going down the really bad vision of violence. So let's all work on that. Thank you so much for being here and for asking these questions.
Thank you. Thank you.